Okay, installment 3. I want to talk about some of the takeaways from chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. In chapter 6, there's this concept, terminology called sunk cost. Often a challenge for us to think about in our decision making when what we've paid for in the past we bring into play for in the current or in the present. And economists want us to ignore what we paid in the past because it has no relevance to our opportunity costs of today. And certainly it can be a challenge for us to let go of what we paid for something when it comes time for either selling it or maybe in relationship to where we are at the gaming tables at the casino or where we are in relationship to the stocks that we purchased and their current values. The point is, though, we want to live in the present, not the past, and so therefore our choices that we make are in relationship to our opportunities cost for the present. And certainly if we hold on to a price that we paid for something in the past, we would be irrational because certainly conditions have changed. Perhaps the demand for what we have to sell have changed. Perhaps we have an urgency to sell. Perhaps prices are lower in comparable products now than they were then. Maybe we overpaid then versus now. So a lot of variables, going on in the market that would be different than the past. And so again, one of the reasons it would be irrational for us to hold on to our sunk cost or bring them into that analysis. By the way, and related to that, and what we've learned from behavioral economics is that the pain of loss is far greater than the joy of winning, which is one of the reasons we tend to hold on to declining stocks way too long, why we tend to end up staying at the gaming tables too long, because again we're trying to get over the pain of the loss that we're experiencing versus enjoy whatever gain we might have had or have and to be satisfied with that. The second concept that I want to talk about is on page 122, 127. Matter of fact, let me put my textbook up here. And the idea of the short run versus the long run. And how this relates then to a couple of things. Certainly it relates to price elasticity, which we've talked a little bit about, that notion that, for example, if we all wake up tomorrow morning and have to get gas and we go to the pumps and the gas is $10 a gallon, well, we're going to buy gas. We may not fill our tanks, but we're going to buy gas. Now, 3 weeks later, if gas is still $10 a gallon, we've probably made some adjustments in the long run. So the short run, we paid $10, but in the long run, now we have time to perhaps join a carpool, get a TriMet pass, ride a bike, sell our gas car for an electric car. But again, we can't do that in the short run, but we can do that in the long run. So there are differences then in our behavior, short run versus long run. In the case of this chapter, though, what it's talking about is really on the supply side or the manufacturer side, how they behave in the short run, what sort of economic conditions occur versus what occurs in the long run. And the economic terms that come into play are things like law of diminishing returns, economies of scale, diseconomies of scale. And think about it this way, if we went into McDonald's and we had a chance to observe their kitchen, and we can see that it's built around efficiency and time management and so forth. And so what they're looking to do is to maximize the use of those, the various cooking equipment with the proper number of employees to maximize delivery of the food in their fast food format. Well, if a manager thought that he could improve their delivery of food, in other words, they could do it faster, he might start adding employees. He keeps adding employees, and he sees, yes, they're able to produce more food and faster. But he finds then, however, as he's monitoring both the efficiency and the delivery, he's noticing that as he adds people, the efficiency and delivery starts to slow down. In other words, they're still producing, but they're not producing now at the same level of efficiency or delivery. And there we have the law of diminishing returns. So the productivity is increasing as we add employees. We get to a point where now the kitchen is starting to get crowded. All of a sudden now folks are jammed and they're not able to move freely between the equipment. And all of a sudden they're still producing, but the quantity that they're producing, the efficiency they're producing is declining. So we get that upward sloping and then downward sloping supply curve or productivity curve or quantity curve, whatever the case might be. One of the things that happens, and let's look on page 127 with regards to contrasting that then what happens in the long term. Now in the short term, if we think about, let's get back to McDonald's, in the short term, you know, this particular location is getting slammed with demand. They're recognizing that to maximize their productivity, they can only put so many employees in their kitchen before they start to see diminishing returns. And so they realize that what they're going to have to do is increase their space. And so what happens then, in the long run, they're able perhaps to add a second kitchen, perhaps build a second kitchen next to it. So if you look on page 127, Exhibit 112, let's see if I can get that up for you, you notice that we get this downward sloping and then upward, and then means the diminishing returns are occurring, and then they kick out a wall, add another building, efficiency improves, and the same thing occurs. And so you get this short-term response. Over the long run, able to increase productivity, starts the law of diminishing returns set in, kick out another wall, add a second plant, add a second crew or shift, and the cycle comes up. So you get this looping, short-term, long-term, short-term, long-term over a period of time. It's an important concept in the manufacturing process, and we won't go into more details here, but from a capital perspective, resource allocation perspective, there's certainly, we see where companies go wrong, they go right, they don't have enough capital, they're growing too fast, so forth. Related to these two are also on page 27, where it talks about economies of scale, diseconomies of scale. Economies of scale are certainly occur when, and we see that in mass-produced products. If you've ever been to a candy factory or a Fran's bakery, and you see where they're making thousands of products, every second. And what's occurring in the definition of economies of scale is that the incremental cost associated with each next item goes down as we increase our economies or our capabilities. On the other hand, in diseconomies of scale, it's a different sort of scenario. This means as we make more, our capabilities go down. In other words, we simply can't scale our economies. And the best example of this is handcrafted goods. If I'm making something by my hands, then I can only make so much so fast. So if I try to make more, then it's likely that my productivity may go down, my quality may go down. So in other words, there's a diseconomy to the scale of growing my capabilities. Let's go to Chapter 7. Chapter 7, just want to touch on the idea of perfect competition. You wrote about this, and many of you, or I should say some of you, noted the distinction. When we talk about perfect competition, we're talking about price takers versus price makers. In other words, they can only take whatever the price is that's presented to them. And this is typically true in the agricultural industry, where we have lots of wheat producers producing the same product, a commodity, and they sell it for the same price, whatever the market is making in that, and they have to take. And what we then see, and I'm on page 135, let me get 135 up here. Yeah, you can just look at it. I won't hold it up. I'm Exhibit 7.3, so the revenues for a perfectly competitive firm, and it shows that the quantity is, when it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the price stays the same, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and so it's simply a multiple then of total quantity versus that fixed price of 5. So bushels or hog bellies or silver fortune or futures, whatever the case might be. In Chapter 8, we have the chapter specific to monopolies, and this is a pure monopoly. It indicates that it's rare, and there are legal reasons for a lot of monopolies. As many of you pointed out, utilities are the classic example of this. We would only want so many electrical service providers because of the lines that are provided. And this is true of other types of utilities. That's pretty straightforward, but we even have patents, copyrights are examples of monopolies, because that one producer has total control over that particular product that's being sold to the market. And then what does the government do to try to encourage or try to make the marketplace better? Well, that's the antitrust rules or policies and regulations that we have that attempt to try to keep the market competitive, believing that if you have too much power in a single or too few hands, then consumers lose, because now there's no competition relative to the price that consumers pay. So they're always looking out for us, but being challenged at the same time. Right now we have some significant mergers and acquisition activity going on, particularly in the healthcare industry, which has tremendous fixed cost and basically a monopoly or a oligopoly when it comes to payment providers and so forth, and structures regulatory systems that they have to deal with. So in order to try to improve their economies, merging is one way to lower their costs so they can remain competitive. So certainly the government tries to do its best to keep a free market competitive by not allowing too much power in too many hands. When Safeway bought Albertsons, it had to get rid of certain number of stores. That's one of the ways that this occurs. In the banking industry, the same thing. A bank may want to merge with another institution, but the regulators may say, well, you can do so, but you're going to have to sell off a certain number of branches or sell them to the local competition, because otherwise you would have too much competition, too many branches in that location. And then in related to that, we see price discrimination. I think we covered that well enough. And then finally, monopolistic competition and oligopolies. Certainly, as you indicated, monopolistic competitions are the most common, where we have lots of competitors competing in a like competitive space, doing lots of different things to try to take market share and improve their profitability, which is their obligation to shareholders. And then oligopolies, which are those few companies that participate in the marketplace, but because of the nature of the products or services that they provide, there are few. We see this in the airlines industry, although one could argue that it's not, because we have actually many airlines producers. But when you look at those that have the most significant routes, the big four dominate. Certainly the oil industry, and there are lots of other small, discrete industries that are oligopolies. In other words, there's only 4 or 5 providers of certain automobile parts, would be an example. The trouble with oligopolies is that from time to time, because there are so few, you can get them in a hotel room and negotiate for trying to fix prices, and we've got history littered with companies that have been brought to task because of their coming together and fixing prices among those oligopoly companies. And the last point that Chapter 9 makes has to do with game theory. Game theory is a fascinating subject. I encourage you to really pay attention to this section of that chapter because it's an important part of our world that we want to make choices relative to our competition that are going to give us a favorable position, or perhaps even a win-win position, but certainly not a lesser position. And so game theory teaches us about the thought process and strategic and mathematical structure associated with how we might go about making a decision relative to the options that our competitors have. So take a look at some of those payout matrix and study those closely, because I think you'll find that's an interesting subject. Lastly, I want to close this video with acknowledging the important contributions of Michael Porter's 1980 book, The Competitive Strategy. Michael Porter, MIT, significant contributor to the world of business strategy. Matter of fact, he is the most cited scholar of any in business literature. I encourage you to look up this information. It's not covered in the text, but in any of your Management 101 or other management-related courses will have some section in Michael Porter. And the piece that I want to draw your attention to is this illustration here of his 5 competitive forces. When he came out with this and delivered this in 1980, it really did change the way management analyzed their competitive position, because it looks not only at how competitors fight among themselves for that market share and ultimately their share of the profit, but it also considers the threat of new entrants. How easy is it that new entrants can come into the market space, and to the degree of which how do you behave to prevent new entrants. It looks at buyer power. You and I as consumers, how do we come into that marketplace to choose among the competitors to ultimately try to pay the lowest price? And of course, the lower price that we pay, the less profit the competitors can make. And so they're constantly, again, looking for ways to counter our power. Internet gives us power, knowledge gives us power, choice gives us power, time gives us power, budget gives us power. Lots of things that are going on in the marketplace. The fourth one is supplier power on the flip side of that. These competitors have to buy goods from somebody, raw materials, lumber for making furniture, etc. And so they're always negotiating with suppliers trying to get the lowest price. And so there are dynamics in that relationship between buyers, the competitors, if you will, in a market space, and the suppliers. So the same sort of things come into play. Certainly if you're Home Depot, you can buy 2x4s at a lower price because you're buying in volume versus maybe a local Mr. Plywood who may be buying a tenth of what Home Depot buys. So they're able to negotiate a lower price from their supplier. And then the fifth of the 5 competitive forces are substitutes. The degree to which new products are made that serve the same function as those being offered in the competitive space, but are different in their structure or composition. Best way to think about that is, for example, man-made sugars as a replacement for agricultural sugar. So the sugar beet industry, the sugarcane industry was impacted. Again, those in that competitive space were impacted when we came up with things like aspartame and Splenda, etc. So those are these substitutes. Plastic lumber as a replacement for wood lumber has had an impact, although small, not as big as the artificial sweeteners have, but still a small impact nevertheless on the lumber industry, because, for example, municipalities are big buyers of plastic lumber because they use them on a lot of the exterior park benches, that kind of thing. So the 5 competitive forces, competitive rivals, those that are within that competitive space, all the home improvement companies, all the fast food companies in their space, all the airlines in their space, all the department stores in their space are all duking it out. Matter of fact, the authors called that the bloody red ocean. And they're always under threat from threat of new entrants, those that could come in. Think about Hollywood Video and Blockbuster. Where are they today when the threat of new entrants was very real, because Netflix, Redbox, etc., streaming videos came into that delivery, that space where we could have access to movies, disrupted and eventually killed those 2 companies. Buyer power, as I said, supplier power, and then ultimately substitutes. So pay attention to that. I think it's one of the most important learnings that you can have as a business student and a person in the business world. So I encourage you, not so much in this course, but because I like this subject though in relation to looking at the monopolistic competitors, because that's where it's particularly true. But in your business learning, make sure you pay attention to that. So with that, I'll stop. See you next time.